We are now joined by Oakland County Department of History professor Witt Dykes to talk about some historic figures in American history that we have recently lost and their continued impact on social justice movements we are seeing today. Professor Dykes, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
How have you been since we last spoke? It's been a few weeks.
Quite well, staying home and wearing masks when I go out.
That's good to hear. That's what we like to hear here. So, over the weekend, we of course we've recently lost a couple of iconic civil rights leaders in the United States, and Reverend C.T. Vivian, and of course Representative John Lewis. Could you give us a little bit of details, particularly on the impact of these two figures in the civil rights movement and how they've impacted the movements we're seeing today?
Well, both Lewis and Vivian and someone else who died about a week or two earlier, Reverend Joseph Lowry, all three of them spent much of their adult years campaigning to get rid of segregation, racism, and to bring equality to African Americans and others. And Reverend Lowry died just a few weeks ago, and he was a Methodist minister, and he worked hard to help. First of all, he supported the Montgomery bus boycott when Martin Luther King was the leader of it. And he also joined the Southern Christian Leadership Conference when King started that. And he eventually became president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference several years after King died. And he made enormous contributions, but he's not as well known because he didn't get into the limelight in a certain way. But Reverend Joseph Lowry, who was a Methodist minister, Reverend King was a Baptist minister, John Lewis, who was C.T. Vivian, who was a Baptist minister, and John Lewis, who had planned to become a minister but never got through the training or the education to be a minister, but who worked hard in a ministerial capacity, so to speak, in helping try to get rid of racial segregation, discrimination, and bring equality to all people. And Lewis has received more attention, though Vivian and Lowry did see a good deal of attention. But Lewis has received more attention because of the physical, personal sacrifices that he undertook. First of all, he was involved in sit-in demonstrations in Nashville. He then got involved in the freedom rides, going from the upper part of the South through the South and all the way into Mississippi. He was jailed many times in Nashville, in Mississippi, and many other places. He had his head cracked in Alabama by Alabama state troopers, and he was just an example of determination to keep testifying and keep campaigning for improvement for civil rights for African Americans. And he felt that if African Americans could get equal rights, then other groups, Native Americans, women, and others could follow suit and get equal rights on some of the same principles.
DeWitt Dykes with us. He's a professor in the Oakland University Department of History, with us on the Oakland County Megacast. Professor Dykes, John Lewis has often been referred to, Representative Lewis has often been referred to as the conscience of Congress. He's been involved not only in, of course, the civil rights movement and movements for more equal rights for African Americans and for other people of color, for indigenous Americans as well. He's also been involved for other marginalized communities. He helped lead the sit-in in the halls of Congress and after the attacks on the nightclub in Orlando in support of the LGBTQ plus community. And he's, as I said, been referred to as the conscience of Congress. What about Representative Lewis and his style of leadership and his ability to communicate with people and bring people together made him so trusted by people of all different points of view and all different political affiliations?
Well, first of all, people respected the fact that he had physically gone to jail, that he had his his skull cracked by policemen in the attempted march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, that he never gave up trying to improve things for others, not merely for himself, not merely for African Americans, but for others, LGBTQ community, for example, Native Americans and others. And he always wanted things to be better and improve it, and he was willing to sacrifice. He was also active in the campaign to free South Africa from minority white rule. He was arrested numerous times for being involved in demonstrations in many, many different areas. And he spent his adult life from the 1960s until just recently campaigning for improvement on some issue and something to make other people have a better lives and to make the United States of America a better place for everyone to live. So he truly sacrificed his life, and he did a lot. And he was both a symbol and an active participant in efforts to improve things.
Professor Dykes, we've talked before about this, but we see so many similarities between the civil rights movements of the 1960s and forward from there and today's Black Lives Matter movement as well. And even though the protests necessarily aren't being consistently shown on national news anymore because there's not fires and there's not people that are looting and all those other situations necessarily that we're seeing much anymore, but these protests are still very much ongoing. And one thing that was really preached by Representative Lewis throughout his career in politics and in social justice movements was starting good trouble, as he called it. What is good trouble, and how does what we're seeing in the Black Lives Matter movement now, as people continue to march throughout cities peacefully throughout the country, how does that mirror what Representative Lewis was talking about with good trouble?
Good trouble essentially means that some of the things that may be not gentlemanly or ladylike that you have to demonstrate, you have to disrupt normal procedures in various bodies, whether it's city council, Congress, or some other place, that you don't just politely say, we wouldn't want this, but demonstrate, sit down, interrupt. And yes, you'll get into, quote, trouble by being arrested, by being told you're not following the rules. But what John Lewis and others tried to say is, as long as there's discrimination against LGBTQ people, against African Americans, against women, and against Native Americans, then somebody, and as many people as possible, should go out and demonstrate, get arrested, get their heads cracked if necessary, though he didn't recommend head cracking, but do whatever is necessary to say, we can't keep going on as usual. We need to have some change, and to demonstrate and put your body in the way, and if necessary, get beat up, arrested, and become someone who says we can't keep going on. The death of George Floyd was tragic, but Eric Garner had the same thing a few years before that, and there are numerous other cases. And what has often happened is that the police who've been trained to deal with bad situations, violent people, armed people, shootouts and all that, they can't seem to understand that under certain circumstances that people, that African Americans especially, are not necessarily automatically guilty of something. And even if they're guilty of driving with a broken tail light, such as in South Carolina, or accused of passing a phony $20 bill, that they still need to be treated with some dignity and respect, and to avoid killing them. And in so many cases, whether it's George Floyd or Eric Garner's being in a chokehold of some sort and being killed because they can't breathe, but what did either Garner do or George Floyd do that deserved their death? $20 bill passed. Well, if he did it, we don't know if he did, but if he did it, then a court case should solve that. And likewise, Eric Garner for selling loose cigarettes, not paying taxes on it, his life is not worth that. But unfortunately, some police have misunderstanding and misuse of their power. And when it comes to very serious situations like armed individuals who are shooting at either others or the police, then certainly the police need to use some form of force. But when citizens who are accused of driving with a broken tail light, as in South Carolina, or passing a phony $20 bill, for example, or selling cigarettes, or the case in Louisville, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor, where she was minding her own business, and apparently the police had the wrong address and bust in without identifying themselves and wound up killing her. And her boyfriend used his gun to shoot back. But the police seem to be out of control in many cases, not all of them. Many of them do excellent service, render very good things to the community, but there are some who feel that their badge and their training is a license to kill, and many of them have what we call an implicit bias. They assume that if a black person is accused of something, they're guilty, and anything they can do to arrest and apprehend them is okay. But George Floyd was handcuffed and then put on the ground. There's nothing he could have done to get away from 4 policemen, and he wasn't trying to get away. So there are times when the police feel that anything they do is justified because African Americans are suspects, and African Americans will somehow don't deserve the same treatment as if it was one of their relatives. So the police often has been seen as an occupying force in the African American community or in any community that African Americans wind up in.
Professor Witt Dykes with us on the Oakland County MegaCast.
Professor, if I could ask you a quick question. You yourself have been a great mentor to so many people. What advice do you give to these young protesters to take it from the streets to policy? How can they make lasting change?
Well, first of all, they need to draw up a set of goals that they have in mind, hopefully goals that will be reachable. They might want to set up goals that they would achieve in stages. An immediate goal, change police tactics. The slogan, defund the police, might need to be redefined to say, take some of the police budget and put it into social work activities. So they need to have clear goals at both the local level, and if they are organized to the state level, and certainly at the national level. They need clear goals, and then ideas on how to accomplish those goals are very important. Any group, whatever it is, needs something more than a slogan and a title. And the Black Lives Matter group has done an enormous amount to call attention to mistreatment, but they do need specific goals and specific strategies, and probably a little more coordination within a state and maybe a region and also nationally. Well, one of the things about John Lewis is that he and other students formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in spring of 1960. And Ella Baker, who worked under Martin Luther King at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, it was her idea that all the students are having sit-in demonstrations at lunch counters and they're acting independently. It would be good if they could organize and coordinate their activities. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from 1960 to 1965 was an enormously effective organization. They went into small towns and lived among the people and helped the people first identify their own goals and then organize the group and then decide what methods they would use to try to achieve their goals. So they were centered toward helping local people with self-definition and self-actualization. And Black Lives Matter, as I understand it, is a decentralized organization, but they need some goals, specific goals, and some coordination, and to work at each level, local, regional, state, and national together. So that would be what I would say. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and other groups proved to be successful in the short run, but to wind up going out of business, shall we say, ending their activities after a number of years. And Black Lives Matter can either, if it can accomplish some of its goals, then it's okay to go out of business. But it's very important to define and to proceed and to work together.
Professor Witt Dykes, a history professor from Oakland University, with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. Professor, we've talked a lot about the various leaders that we've lost in recent weeks, particularly over the weekend, Reverend C.T. Vivian and Representative John Lewis. What is something that everybody can learn from these leaders, regardless of their racial background, of their socioeconomic background, their political background? What's something that each one of us can take as a lesson from the lives of these great leaders and use that to go forward and create necessary change in our society?
Well, the basic idea of Reverend Vivian, John Lewis, and also Reverend Joseph Lowry, who died a few weeks before, all of them worked hard to identify what needs to be changed, who is trying to work on changing it, to come together, support those persons who are trying to make these changes. First of all, define targets that need to be addressed, and then also some method of trying to do it, and to obstruct normal functioning. That's the good trouble that John Lewis was talking about. If a lunch counter won't serve African Americans, then let's go sit in and demand they serve it. And not only plan, but know what your rights are under the circumstances. So dedication to improving society, to helping a wide range of people, to trying to form coalitions with others who either understand and or who are also disadvantaged in some form or fashion. Those are the basic ideas. And if you can't get city council, state government, county government, or the nation to pay attention to your specific demands at the moment, figure out how you can get something started and also coordinate with others. Planning, orchestrating with others, joining others, and seizing the right moment, finding the right moment to make your demands. These are some of the goals. And never give up, and don't worry about being ladylike or being gentlemanly. Try to stay within the law, but if you get arrested and go to jail, fine. John Lewis and others were arrested many times. John Lewis and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they believe jail, no bail. If you put us in jail, we'll stay. And the longer we stay, it'll call attention to the injustice we're campaigning against. And so that was how Lewis, Diane Nash, many other students, even the mayor of Washington, D.C., I forget his name right now, but the former mayor who just died, but he was, they went to jail and stayed there until in some cases, the people put them out of jail because they were getting too much publicity being in the jail. So Marion Barry is the man's name I was trying to think of. But he came out of the SNCC movement in Nashville Student Movement in 1960, and then other Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee movement beyond that, before he settled in Washington and became mayor.
Well, Professor Dykes, we thank you for being with us. You're so gracious with your time and your knowledge, and we always learn something having you on here each and every time we have you on the program. We appreciate having you on today.
My pleasure, and let me know when you need more information.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you very much. Professor Witt Dykes from the Department of History at Oakland University with us on the Oakland County MegaCast.